everyone, it's Ronnie here with Daybreak Star Radio, the only station indigenizing the airwaves, and I'm joined with...
Hey, Sherry here. So glad everybody can meet us today. And for those of you who don't know who this person on the screen is, this is Gary Farmer, amazing trailblazer in the world of film and music.
He's known for his compelling performances in classics like Wow Highway, Dead Man. Gary has also captured hearts with, his role in Reservation Dogs, bringing depth and humor to his character. He's a gifted musician with his blues band, and has energized audiences all across America.
And so, for those of you who don't know, that's Gary Farmer and the Troublemakers, yes. Right?
So a big welcome to our guest today, Gary Farmer. Thank you for being here with us. We appreciate it. How are you doing?
I've been dealing with some medical issues, I guess, that most people deal with at my age, but I'm working my way through it and feeling a lot better.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So our first question, just to get to know a little bit about you, with a rich career spanning decades in film and music, can you share with us what initially drew you to the entertainment industry?
Well, I started off studying a number of different things when I was out of high school, and I picked up an interest in photography in my last season of high school. And it was one way to get out of football. I took pictures of the team. They didn't bug me to play, but I was a strong, 6'3" athlete. I was a pretty heavyweight guy. Grew up in the west side of Buffalo, New York, born in Cayuga, Ontario, which is my community, Six Nations along the Grand River. And about 18 miles west of Hamilton, Ontario. I went to school mostly in the States as a child and into university. Studied police science for a while, which, I thought that was the way to help.
Yeah.
Back in the day, was in school for police science when the Attica prison riot broke out. And my study of the parole system showed me that the system was pretty corrupt, and that I'd only be a spoke in the wheel if I actually participated in it. And so I turned to my photography interest, and I entered Syracuse University on the concept of getting into the School of Communications. I had to, tell a fib at my home res. I had to study something in the States that I couldn't study in Canada, so I told him I wanted to be an FBI agent in 1973. Of course, the year of Wounded Knee. I was pretty uninformed growing up in a kind of a non-native world, even though I had a close association to my native community. I had eventually flunked out of Syracuse University after the first year, having to fail chemistry, which I've never gotten along with. I went back home, and my parents took over a general store in our community, and I helped them for some time over the years, and that's how I got to know my own people, and began socializing myself to my culture and history and ceremonial life among the Haudenosaunee of Six Nations. And I eventually ended up at a school of photography. I studied photography and motion production at Ryerson, now named Toronto Metropolitan University, as the name Ryerson turned out to be the guy who sophisticated the residential school system for Native people in Canada. We managed to get the name changed. But there was a Cree man. He was an opera singer and an actor. His name was James Buller. He passed away probably in 1982. He started a native theater school for young children, really. It was probably 13 to 18 at the time. I was around 20 years old, and, I had been doing some work with him for photography, and he asked me if I would go. They had a British theatrical teacher named David Calderisi, a well-known Canadian actor. And this was a small rural Anishinaabe community out of Cape Croker, Ontario. It's a little north of us by about 3 or 4 hours, and a beautiful territory. And the kids were kind of still putting frogs in beds, and they're pretty immature. And he set me up there with them. And I was like Mother Goose for the youth, and kind of followed me into this theatrical experience. But I came away from it just totally blown away, realizing, this is how I can change the world. And I've stuck with it ever since. It's been 50 years now, and I'm eternally grateful to that experience. James also had a World Indigenous Theater Festival, if you can imagine that, in 1980. And he brought, Indigenous people from around the world to Peterborough, Ontario, Trent University. And it was my first conference, and, among theater workers from, Indigenous people around the world. And I don't think I even knew at the time that Indigenous people existed worldwide. And it really opened up my perspective, in terms of the world community, Indigenous people in Central and South America, and of course in Australia and New Zealand and Japan. Of course, the Ainu from Japan were hunted down by the Japanese because they were hairy. And of course, Sami became a big vital part of our theatrical community in those days, and it remains so. That school still continues. It's called the Center for Indigenous Theatre now, based out of Toronto, Ontario, and it's been 50 years of experience for Native people. It's really had a profound impact on the acting community and producing community, and of course the directing community now, as well as the showrunners that we've made over the course of history in the last 50 years. And eventually I worked with Canada and the CRTC, and we eventually launched the Aboriginal People's Television Network. I had a lot of experience trying to get an Aboriginal, we called ourselves that at the time, Aboriginal Radio Network. And I won like 70% of the major cities. Well, I had 70% by radio of the Canadian population by whole. And we launched these television network around 2000. So all my experience with the CRTC trying to win radio license really, as I helped to write the license and presented the presentation to the CRTC, which is like the FCC in the States, with surprising luck. And it's celebrating some 21 years of broadcasting. And I remember at the time we may have had 5 or 10 producers that could actually produce in television. And we're probably up to about 200 now. So that network has really had a profound impact. I don't think the country of Canada nor the political Indigenous community in Canada really wanted an artist-run radio network, because I was hopeful to provide, all the history and context of our relationship between Indigenous people in Canada, which most Canadians didn't know at the time. And of course, that residential school system, as it went farther west from the east, where it started in my community, about 9 miles outside our community, we started the first residential school system. And of course, I used to try to get films made that showed that South Africa impacted, the homeland system down there during the apartheid period. They learned everything from, the residential schools that were first established in Canada. Yep. And then, of course, shortly after, the United States for both Black and Indigenous people. So that route as a young performer, still staying as the actor, has had a profound impact, I think, on our ability to maintain our voice throughout the continent.
Yeah, I think that's really great, having the ability to insert the history where oftentimes people don't want it is it's a challenge, but thank you for trying to push it forward. That's, I guess, challenging.
I really had the interest to bring Indigenous music from around the world to the audiences, and the thought was we also tried to run it from the sun. I had a lot of experience with alternative energy back in my youth, or, I married into a very ecological woman who we moved off the grid after our marriage, shortly after Powell Highway. And my first wife, she wrote the script for Powell Highway. And we were very successful living off of wind and solar back in the late 80s and into the 90s. It was a really interesting time.
I bet. So, over the years, you've played some memorable characters. What role has been the most significant to you personally, and why?
Well, probably has to be, of course, Powell Highway, but that put me on the forefront of Indian casting. Having won the audience award at the Sundance Film Festival in '89. From that film, I was cast in Dead Man, along with independent, stalwart James Jarmusch, Jim Jarmusch. In that film, Dead Man, working with Johnny Depp, the amazing cinematographer we had, a Danish fella, and of course Jim, and the amazing cast we had in a black and white Neil Young music on an original track, and trying to, like an acid revisioning of Western settlement was probably the most profound film of my, middle career.
Yeah, I love that film so much. And your character was really, really good. I'm sure you've heard that before, but I saw that film and then I literally just kind of ran around to anybody who would listen to me, telling them to watch the film.
Yeah, I didn't know quite who to turn to. I always try to do as much research as I can on a character like that. And even with Filbert, I'm an Eastern Lakes, Indian, not really exposed to Western culture. And, Northern Cheyenne culture was alien to me. I was, I think, at a play in Montreal doing Guys and Dolls, having too much fun with all the chorus girls when I got cast in Powell Highway. So I remember going there, asking the director if I could go a few weeks early, and hung out with the locations manager, who introduced me to, one of the main keepers of the cultural identity and ceremonial life in Lake Deer, named, Jimmy Red Cloud. My relationship with Jim there, really changed my perspective and had a profound impact on my life. Basically, pulling from Jim and his culture and all the songs he taught me in the short time we had together. And I remember him taking me it was around Halloween time, and they were having all these little small powwows all over, Northern Cheyenne Reservation, which is a fairly large territory, just above where Custer met his end. And Jim would have me tell the story of Powell Highway to the community, because we were just about to shoot this film, even though the filmmakers, none of which had ever been to an Indian community before, were exposed to the storyline. And And I'll never forget these powwows because everybody was outfitted in bathroom wear and kitchen wear. There was a lot of old ladies, mostly men, of course, all men. It was the most comical series of powwows I ever attended in my life. I even remember Richard Nixon and Muammar Gaddafi dancing together with those big head masks. And I realized how politically astute the Northern Cheyenne were. And they had only a community of 3,000 people, but they had 400 people served during the Vietnam War. So when I arrived, it was an extreme healing going on, sweat lodges, ceremonial life was at its extreme, trying to, heal the exposure to that, unjust war that carried out in the, late 50s into the 60s and, of course, into the 70s. So it had profound impact on my life and career, that experience in Lame Deer, Montana.
So speaking when it comes to, your career and acting career, which we've talked about a bit here, you've also had a very, very prominent music career with, Gary Farmer and the Troublemakers. And I'm always curious, how do you balance your passions for both music and acting? And do you ever feel that, one influences the other when it comes to your creative process?
Oh, of course. Most of my writing, if you listen to my songs, are very environmentally based, asking questions of my audience. As the years passed on, I learned how to write a love song or two. But most of them have been very conscientious, trying to raise consciousness with any audience that would listen, based around the blues. And of course, that relationship between Black and Native America, Black, Americans and Black Canadians. Of course, the Tuscarora Trail, which, we were only originally 5 nations around the 11th century during, that peace among ourselves, the Tree of Peace, and our execution of, peace was widespread at contact, certainly among tribal peoples. Many confederacies were established around that same time. And of course, the Tuscaroras down in North Carolinas and the Carolinas in the South, and of course the Seminoles, were warred upon by America in the early 1700s. And the trail that the Tuscaroras came to the Haudenosaunee at that time was only one fire, probably, based around Onondaga in Syracuse, New York. Later became the Underground Railroad. And when, the slaves first came in the 1760s or so, they used our crop, corn. The Europeans didn't have a crop that could feed people over the long journey in that ship. They only had oats or barley. You plant one, you get 6 or 8 seeds. You plant one corn, you might get 270. So our crop actually revolutionized the economy in the world, basically developed by the Mayan people, and extended. Of course, the Mayan turned out to be in northern Georgia. I always wonder how the crop got to us so fast, but the corn, beans, and squash have been our basis of existence, and it fed the world really quite quickly. And that relationship, when they came, of course, the people were there when they were there, the Black folks, and so that relationship has never really been told. That history and that understanding of that relationship is still a story to be told at the formulation of this relatively corrupt country.
Yeah. The corn for sure revolutionized, and it's amazing the little minuscule, almost non-existent credit that the natives get for feeding the world, because it's all kinds of lettuces, tomatoes, squash, corn. All of that was developed, and there was a massive trade network with highways from, way up in Canada all the way down to Chile. And nobody ever talks about that.
Nope.
Yeah, Eagle Meets the Condor has been a concept I've certainly gotten aware of very early. And, that trade route system, they say when the conquistadors met the Zuni Pueblo, at the time, they had 200 varieties of beans. So that's sophistication of our system. There is an operation down there run by author Gary Nabham, who's actually from North Africa, has really sustained a lot of that traditional seed. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think the name of that company who supplies any Indian person or community who would be interested in the nurturing of that seed from the Tucson, Arizona region. He's written some fine books too. But that Eagle Meets the Condor concept came to me very early in my fledgling. But when I think about it, my acting career has really kind of educated me, socialized me, and opened my eyes beyond belief over my 50-year career.
Amazing. Well, on that, I want to go to the mockumentary question, which is, hey, Victor, seen as a follow-up to Smoke Signals, what was it like revisiting that thematic space with Native stories in a mockumentary format?
I thought it was a brilliant idea. I was in right from the beginning. I wish I wouldn't have argued for, I didn't hear, he came, I've known him since, and his mom and his whole family since we were all hanging out in Los Angeles trying to secure work back in the 80s and 90s. And Georgina has been a longtime friend. I think we did that President's show with, I can't think of his name. It was a long time ago where we played the Delaware, Muncie, Delaware people trying to impact the President of the United States. Martin Sheen was the president. I can't think of that show, but we've had a long association together. And, and her story alone is very special. And how, her daughter and her son and her other son as well, they have an older brother, were all involved in the movement back in the day. But Cody, having been cast as a 9-year-old in Smoke Signals, and of course Simon Baker, another dear friend who I'm currently working on developing a series called Hempire, because hemp, I believe, can change the world, replace plastic. We don't need the whatever they're using, whatever the fellow who's building the electric cars is trying to encourage everyone to go dig up. What is it?
Cobalt and lithium.
Yeah.
Lithium. Yeah, we can make batteries as strong out of hemp as we can lithium. So I'm a strong believer in the hemp plant, revolutionizing the 7th generation. I see that as the future for our young. If they can get Ted Turner to grow hemp, it takes all the carbon out of the air that we need to be taken out. And it's just, and of course, we have enough territories on our own. The amount of land that we have left would have an impact on the carbon fight that we're facing for climate change and all of that. So, but, he wanted to tell this story because he has his career after being a child actor and then kind of suffering through years of no success is really the thesis for the film. And I certainly was supportive of that. And, we also had a beautiful relationship in terms, after, I'm pretty sure it was after, So Dead Man came first, and then Smoke Signals was like 3 years later. And then Johnny, in a lesser-known film, directed a film called, it was like a snuff film with Marlon Brando and Westerman, and Johnny Depp played the father to Cody. And then after that, Cody had a really special relationship for Johnny for like a few years, not that long. I remember him buying, Cody a set of drums. He wanted to be a drummer. And he was like a father figure because Cody never had a father. Well, he did, but he was a bit of just, didn't work out. And so he grew up without a dad. And then Johnny just kind of disappeared, went to France and got married and had his own children. And I always thought that Cody inspired Johnny to have children. But that was a part of the movie we improvised. But he did use it because it complicated the storyline a bit. But yeah, I thought it was a hilarious romp. And really, I was so glad that it had a theatrical run, and mostly in Canada, very little in the States. But it'll allow Cody to make more films, and I think he really should. So that was an excellent project. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're definitely looking forward for it to finally hit theaters on a regular down here in the United States. We just recently got to speak with Cody about it, and yeah, it's an amazing raunchy film.
Yeah. But he originally wanted me to play the priest, of course. A priest that we played against, that I said, and I had just done a priest for a still photographer here in Santa Fe, very famous now, Cara Ribeiro. And she had me like almost strangling a powwow, traditional dancer woman. And there was a boy hanging on a noose in the back. And I was the priest, and it was such an impactful photograph. It's about touring at the world right now. And I just didn't want to be a priest again after my own experience with the church. But I said, look, I'll be a cop, because I was the cop that never was. So, I wish I would have stayed the priest for Cody. He must have had some other themes running through. And sometimes as the actor, you think you know better, but it's always best to trust, the artistic visioner.
Right.